A burned paw, a hidden wall, and a dog that refused to walk away. What exactly had Roy Callahan left behind? Bear slammed into the old garage wall again, barking so hard dust poured from the seams. At the same moment, orange flames climbed behind the storage shed, and Jack felt the sharp smell of smoke hit the back of his throat. The dog ignored the fire, ignored Jack's commands, kept staring at one spot as if something on the other side couldn't wait another second. What do you think Bear was trying to find? The eviction notice was taped crooked across the aluminum door at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. Jack Mercer stood there in the cold Wyoming-colored light of a Missouri dawn and read it twice before touching it. The paper fluttered slightly in the wind. Final notice: vacate within 7 days. He stared at the bold letters, then at his own reflection in the narrow window beside the door. 73 years old, gray stubble, deep lines around his eyes. A man who had spent most of his life carrying a rifle, a toolbox, or grief. Bear pushed his nose against Jack's leg. The German shepherd looked up at him, waiting. Jack reached down and scratched behind the dog's ear. Yeah, he said quietly. I see it too. He left the notice where it was. Inside, the trailer felt smaller than ever. The coffee maker rattled and hissed. The familiar sound filled the silence, while Bear settled beside the kitchen table. Jack poured himself a mug and sat down. The notice lay beside the cup. Steam rose between them. 3 hours of sleep, that was all he had gotten. At 2:07 that morning, a semi-truck had hit a pothole on the highway half a mile away. The metallic crash had slammed into his dreams. For one disorienting second, he had been back in Iraq, back in Fallujah. A steel vehicle door, shouting, dust, someone yelling for a medic. Jack had rolled out of bed before he was awake, landing in a crouch beside the wall. Old habits, old ghosts. The trailer had been dark and silent except for Bear, who immediately crossed the room and pressed against him until his breathing slowed. Now the dog watched him from beneath the table, patient, loyal, the only living creature who knew exactly how many bad nights existed between the good ones. Jack took a sip of coffee. Cold fear didn't arrive all at once. It came in small calculations, no savings, no family nearby, no house, no plan. His wife Linda had been gone 8 years. Cancer had taken her slowly. The house had followed. Then the jobs. Then the friends who promised to call. Eventually all that remained was the trailer, the pickup truck outside, and Bear. Jack finished the coffee and stood. If he had 7 days, he needed to know what he still owned. The answer wasn't much. An old military footlocker sat in the bedroom closet beneath winter blankets and forgotten paperwork. Dust coated the lid. He carried it into the kitchen. Bear lifted his head immediately. Jack opened it. Tax forms, photographs, army records, letters. A folded American flag from his retirement ceremony. Near the bottom sat a yellow envelope he didn't recognize. The return address stopped him cold. Park County, Wyoming. His fingers tightened around the paper. Inside was a deed, a property transfer, a garage. 1 acre of land outside a mountain town called Alder Creek. Purchase value listed on the county record. $5. Jack frowned. Then he saw the name, Roy Callahan. For several seconds, the kitchen disappeared. He could almost hear Roy laughing across a dusty motor pool 20 years earlier. Roy with grease on his hands. Roy sharing bad coffee before dawn patrols. Roy dragging everyone through impossible days with sarcasm and stubbornness. Jack hadn't seen him in years. The last thing he remembered hearing was that Roy had died alone somewhere out west. Yet somehow Roy had left him a garage. Not a son, not a cousin, not family. Him. Bear stood and walked over. The dog rested his chin on Jack's knee. Jack stared at the deed. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the trailer walls. For the first time all morning, something other than loss entered the room. A question. Why? Why would Roy leave this place to him? And why had nobody told him? Jack looked down at Bear. Well, partner, he said. The dog's ears perked immediately. Looks like we're going to Wyoming. Bear's tail thumped once against the floor. the first genuine sound of hope in the trailer all day. Jack folded the deed carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Neither of them noticed that the eviction notice outside had finally come loose from the door. The wind carried it across the empty lot. Neither of them looked back. By noon the next day, the trailer was empty. Everything Jack Mercer still owned fit into the bed of a 20-year-old Ford pickup. A few tools, 2 duffel bags, a military footlocker, a coffee maker held together with electrical tape, and Bear. The German Shepherd sat in the passenger seat, watching the world through the window as Jack pulled onto the highway. Missouri disappeared behind them 1 mile at a time. The farther they drove, the lighter the truck seemed to feel. Not because it carried less weight, because there was nothing left to lose. The road stretched west beneath a sky so wide it made a man feel small. Fields gave way to rolling hills. The hills became open country. Jack drove in silence most of the first day. The radio stayed off. Bear occasionally shifted position, lifting his head whenever they passed a rest stop, a gas station, or another vehicle moving too slowly behind them. Old working habits. The dog noticed everything, so did Jack. At a truck stop outside Nebraska, he parked facing the exit without thinking about it. When he entered the diner, he chose the booth with a view of both doors. He scanned the room once. Couple near the window, 2 truckers by the counter, teenager working the register. No threats, no reason to care. Yet his eyes cataloged it anyway. Bear settled beneath the table. The waitress brought coffee. Jack wrapped both hands around the mug. The smell carried him backward 20 years. A plywood mess hall, dust blowing through gaps in canvas walls. Roy Callahan laughing at something that wasn't funny. Neither man had been young then. Neither had expected to grow old. Yet somehow Jack was driving toward a garage Roy had left behind. The thought stayed with him all afternoon. Why him? Why now? Why a garage worth $5? That night they slept in the truck outside a rest area in South Dakota. Or at least Bear slept. Jack drifted in and out. At 1:43 a.m., a car door slammed somewhere nearby. His eyes opened instantly, heart already racing. For one confused second, the darkness became another darkness. Another country, another year. His hand moved toward a rifle that wasn't there. Bear immediately lifted his head. The dog pressed his nose against Jack's arm, grounding him, anchoring him. The rest area slowly returned. The highway, the stars, the truck. Wyoming waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Easy, partner, Jack whispered. Bear settled back down but kept one eye open until Jack finally relaxed. The next morning, they crossed into Wyoming. The land changed again. Grasslands rolled beneath endless skies. Then came the mountains, dark blue shapes rising in the distance. Absaroka Range, jagged, ancient. Snow still clinging to the higher ridges despite the season. Jack hadn't seen country like this in years. Something about it reminded him of why men used to disappear into the wilderness and never come back. The roads narrowed. Traffic thinned. Cell service vanished. By late afternoon, a faded sign appeared beside the highway. Alder Creek population, 814. Jack turned onto Main Street. A few brick buildings, a feed store, a gas station, a diner, a church with white paint peeling from its steeple. The mining boom that once fed the town had clearly died years ago. Many storefronts sat empty, but the place wasn't dead, just tired, like an old soldier still standing watch. Jack stopped at the diner. The bell above the door jingled softly. Every conversation inside seemed to pause for half a second. Not enough to be rude, just enough to notice a stranger. Bear stayed beside him. The waitress smiled. Passing through? Maybe. She poured coffee. That's usually what people say before they stay. Jack almost smiled. Almost. When she brought the menu, her eyes drifted to the folded deed sitting beside his coffee cup. Property out here? She asked. Looks that way. Where? Jack told her. The smile faded slightly. Roy Callahan's place. A man at the counter glanced over, then another. Something passed between them. Not fear, not dislike. Recognition. Jack noticed. He always noticed. "What about Roy?" he asked. The waitress wiped the counter slowly. "Depends who you ask." "And if I'm asking you?" She looked through the front window toward the mountains. Roy wasn't the man people thought he was. Then she walked away before explaining. The words stayed with Jack. Outside, Bear suddenly stood, his ears locked forward. His body became rigid. Jack followed the dog's gaze. Across the street near the gas pumps, a man stood beside a dusty pickup truck, late 60s, baseball cap, gray beard, watching. Not casually, not accidentally, watching Jack. The moment their eyes met, the man climbed into his truck. The engine started. Seconds later, he drove away. Bear continued staring long after the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Jack's stomach tightened. Old instincts stirred. Not fear, observation. The same instinct that once kept men alive. He memorized the truck. Color, damage on the rear quarter panel, partial plate number. Then he finished his coffee. Outside, the mountains darkened beneath the evening sky. Somewhere beyond them waited Roy's garage. And now, apparently, someone who knew Jack had arrived. Someone who had been waiting. The next morning broke cold and clear. Jack left Alder Creek just after sunrise. The diner coffee still sat warm in a travel mug beside him, while Bear occupied the passenger seat, watching the road ahead. The directions from the deed were simple. County Road 18, then a dirt track, then another mile into the foothills. The mountains seemed larger in daylight. Dark pine forests climbed their slopes. Patches of snow lingered in the shadows. Clouds drifted across the peaks like slow-moving ships. The farther Jack drove, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no houses, no cell service. Only wind moving through the trees. The dirt road narrowed until branches occasionally brushed the sides of the truck. Jack slowed. His eyes moved automatically from mirror to tree line to road. A lifetime of observation was difficult to turn off. Bear suddenly sat up straighter. His ears pointed forward. "We close?" Jack asked. The dog's tail thumped once. 10 minutes later, the garage appeared. It stood alone near the edge of a meadow surrounded by pine-covered hills. The building was larger than Jack expected. A weathered metal structure with 2 bay doors and a faded red roof. Time had taken its toll. Paint peeled from the walls. One gutter hung loose. Grass grew through cracks in the gravel lot. Yet the place didn't look abandoned. It looked paused, like someone had stepped away for a moment and never returned. Jack shut off the engine. Silence settled over the valley. Bear climbed out first. The dog immediately began circling the building, nose down, methodical, working. Jack watched him for a moment before turning his attention to the key Roy had left behind. The lock resisted, then gave way with a metallic click. The bay door groaned upward. Dust drifted through shafts of sunlight. Jack froze. The garage wasn't empty. It was perfect. Rows of tools lined the walls. Every wrench, every socket, every screwdriver. Everything hung exactly where it belonged. The organization reminded Jack of military supply rooms. Not neat for appearance, neat for efficiency. A place where a man could find what he needed in the dark. His eyes moved across the pegboards. Nothing random, nothing careless. Roy's fingerprints were everywhere. The years suddenly peeled away. For a second, Jack could see him again, laughing beside a Humvee, arguing over coffee, complaining about officers. Still alive, still stubborn. Jack stepped farther inside. Dust covered everything, but not heavily. Someone had maintained the building after Roy's death. Or at least tried to. The hydraulic lift remained spotless. The workbench was organized. Oil cans sat in perfect rows. Even the floor looked swept. Bear entered behind him. Unlike Jack, the dog showed no interest in the tools. He walked directly toward the back of the garage. Purposeful, focused. Jack followed. A narrow door opened into a small living space. The room stopped him cold. A single steel bed, a dresser, a wood stove, a shelf filled with worn paperbacks, an old radio, and above the bed, a folded American flag inside a glass case. Jack removed his cap. Instinct respect. The room felt less like a home and more like a field outpost. Functional, efficient, everything serving a purpose. Roy had lived here, maybe for years, maybe alone. Jack stared at a photograph on the dresser. Two younger soldiers stood beside a vehicle somewhere in Iraq. One was Roy, the other was Jack. He hadn't seen the picture in nearly 20 years. His chest tightened. Bear nudged his hand gently. Jack exhaled. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know." Outside, the wind rattled the building. The sound echoed through the walls. For a brief moment it became something else. Metal vibrating, distant gunfire, a radio crackling with urgency. Jack blinked. The room returned. Wyoming. Not Fallujah, not Baghdad, just Wyoming. He stepped back into the garage. Bear wasn't beside him anymore. The dog had moved across the building, toward the far wall. Jack watched him stand motionless, completely motionless, the way trained dogs do when they find something important. Bear's ears were forward, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on a section of wall behind the main workbench. Bear, nothing. The dog didn't move. Jack crossed the floor. The wall looked ordinary enough. Old paneling, dust, shadows, nothing obvious. Yet Bear refused to leave. Jack walked away. The dog stayed. He called again. Bear glanced at him once, then looked back at the wall. Jack frowned. Years ago, during patrols, he had learned something simple. Ignore a soldier's instincts, and you might regret it. Ignore a working dog's instincts, and you almost certainly would. The afternoon passed as Jack unloaded supplies and explored the property. But every time he looked inside the garage, Bear was there, waiting, watching the same wall. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, golden light spilled through the dusty windows. Long shadows stretched across the floor. Jack set down a toolbox. Bear stepped forward, then another step. Then he placed a paw against the wall. Scratch. A small sound, then another. Scratch. Jack stared. The dog wasn't playing. He wasn't bored. He was trying to tell him something. Bear scratched again. This time harder. Dust drifted from the paneling. And somewhere behind that wall, something made the faintest hollow sound. Jack stood motionless. Bear scratched once more. The sound came again. Not the solid thud of a support beam. Not insulation. Empty space. Something hidden. The last light of day stretched across the garage floor as Jack ran his hand along the wall. The paneling looked ordinary. A man could stare at it for years and never notice anything unusual. Bear noticed. The dog stepped back and sat down, waiting, watching. Jack grabbed a flashlight from his toolbox, then a pry bar. Years ago in Iraq, he had learned that unusual spaces often hid important things. Weapons caches, radios, documents, sometimes nothing at all. But Roy had been Army. Roy had thought like Army. Jack slipped the edge of the pry bar into a narrow seam between two panels. The wood resisted, then moved. A dry crack echoed through the garage. The panel shifted half an inch. Bear immediately stood. His tail stiffened. Jack pulled harder. Another crack. A section of paneling swung outward like a concealed door. Behind it was darkness. For several seconds, neither man nor dog moved. The flashlight beam cut into the opening. A narrow storage space appeared, no larger than a closet. No treasure, no gold, no stacks of cash. Just shelves, dozens of shelves. Jack stepped closer. Boxes, folders, binders, photographs, maps, and notebooks. Hundreds of them. The air smelled old, paper and dust and time. Bear squeezed past him and sniffed carefully around the small room. Then he sat down beside a stack of boxes, as if to say, "This is what I wanted you to find." Jack picked up the nearest notebook. The cover was worn. Roy Callahan, 2008. He opened it. The first page contained a name, a phone number, a short note, paid electric bill, 3 months. Needed help after surgery. Nothing else. The next page held another name. Fixed transmission, no charge. Widow. The next page. Bought groceries. Left on porch. The next. Paid heating fuel. Winter emergency. The next and the next and the next. Jack sat down on an old wooden crate outside. Darkness settled over the mountains. Inside, only the flashlight illuminated the pages. Hours passed. He barely noticed. Every notebook contained the same thing. People. Hundreds of people. Veterans, single mothers, elderly couples, families who had fallen behind, teenagers trying to stay in school. Roy had written everything down. Not for praise, not for recognition. The entries were short, almost military. Facts only. Mission complete. Move on. Jack remembered Roy's personality perfectly. The man hated attention, hated being thanked. Whenever somebody called him a hero, he usually changed the subject. Now Jack understood why. Roy had spent decades helping people without telling anyone, without posting about it, without asking for anything back. A photograph slipped from one of the folders. Jack picked it up. An elderly woman stood beside a pickup truck, smiling. Written on the back were 3 words, "Truck runs again." Another photo. A young family in front of a mobile home. New furnace installed. Another. A veteran standing beside a repaired wheelchair ramp. Winter ready. Jack slowly lowered the picture. The silence inside the garage felt different now. Not empty. Occupied. The place suddenly seemed crowded with invisible lives. Every tool hanging on those walls. Every workbench. Every wrench. Everything had been used to help someone. Bear rested his head on Jack's knee. The old dog had been quiet for nearly an hour. Jack absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about himself. Not the eviction, not the debt, not the nightmares. Only Roy, and the man he apparently never truly knew. Near midnight, Jack finally stood. His knees popped, his back complained. He closed one notebook and reached for another, then froze. A name stared back at him from the first page. Not a stranger, not somebody from Wyoming. A name from another life, another war, another world. Jack's breathing slowed. His fingers tightened around the cover. He knew that name. Knew it instantly. Because some names never leave you. Not after 20 years. Not after a battlefield. Not after a funeral. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. Bear lifted his head, watching him carefully. The name at the top of the page read, Ethan Burke, and beneath it, written in Roy's familiar handwriting, was a note that made Jack's blood run cold. Monthly support payment delivered. His mother still doesn't know the whole story. Jack stared at the page. The words blurred for a moment. Not because the flashlight was weak, because Ethan Burke had never really left him. Bear shifted closer. The old German shepherd rested against Jack's boot, sensing the change before Jack said a word. Outside, wind moved through the pines. Inside, the garage felt suddenly smaller. 20 years vanished. Jack was back in Fallujah. Dust blowing through shattered buildings. Radio traffic crackling through an earpiece. Young soldiers trying to look older than they were. Ethan had been 22. Smart, fast. The kind of kid who could make an entire convoy laugh after 12 miserable hours on the road. Jack remembered the last morning clearly. Too clearly. Ethan drinking instant coffee from a metal cup. Complaining about the heat. Talking about visiting his mother when his tour ended. The memory stopped there. Jack closed his eyes. Some memories always stopped at the same place. He opened the notebook again. Below Ethan's name were dozens of entries, month after month, year after year, rent assistance, medical bills, heating fuel, home repairs. Always anonymous, always delivered through someone else, always paid by Roy. Jack swallowed hard. Roy had continued helping Ethan's mother long after the army stopped calling, long after the casualty officers left, long after the folded flag, long after everyone else moved on. The notebook contained 12 years of payments. 12 years. Jack sat back against the wall. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he whispered. The question drifted into the empty garage. Only Bear answered. The dog rested his head on Jack's leg. Silent, steady, present. Jack kept reading. One notebook became two, two became three. The deeper he looked, the more impossible Roy became. There was a widow whose truck Roy repaired every winter. A disabled veteran whose mortgage payment appeared every Christmas. A rancher recovering from surgery who never discovered who paid his medical deductible. a teenage girl whose community college tuition had somehow been covered after her father died. The names filled pages. Hundreds of lives. Hundreds of quiet interventions. No publicity, no recognition, no speeches. Roy had built an entire legacy in secret. Sometime after midnight, Jack finally stood. His knees protested. Bear followed him into the small living quarters. The old wood stove still worked. Jack fed it a few pieces of pine and watched the flames come alive. Orange light danced across the room. He found himself studying Roy's belongings differently now. Not as relics, as evidence. The shelf of books, the worn jacket hanging by the door, the coffee mug with a chipped handle, the stack of unpaid invoices Roy had apparently never bothered collecting. Everything looked ordinary. That was the strange part. Heroes weren't supposed to look ordinary, yet Roy's entire life suggested otherwise. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, Bear curled up nearby. The garage creaked softly in the mountain wind. For the first time in years, Jack didn't turn on a television before trying to sleep. The silence felt different here. Not empty, occupied, filled with stories, filled with people Roy had helped. Eventually exhaustion won. Jack drifted off. The dream came quickly. A convoy moving through narrow streets, sun reflecting off broken glass, a radio transmission, then contact, gunfire, someone shouting coordinates. Jack woke instantly. His hand had already reached for a weapon that wasn't there. His heart hammered. The room was dark. The stove glowed faintly. Wyoming, not Iraq. He forced himself to breathe. Across the room, Bear had already lifted his head, watching, waiting, making sure Jack came all the way back. "It's okay," Jack whispered. The dog settled again. Morning arrived, cold and gray. Clouds clung to the mountains. Jack brewed coffee in Roy's old percolator. The smell filled the room. Bear sat beside the doorway, staring outside, alert, focused. Jack carried his mug into the garage. He intended to continue reading. Instead, something else caught his eye. Another notebook sat partially hidden beneath a stack of folders. The cover looked newer than the others. Jack opened it. The first page contained a single name, nothing else, no explanation, no address, just a name written in Roy's handwriting. A name Jack recognized immediately. A name that shouldn't have been there, because the man attached to it had been dead for nearly 20 years. Jack slowly lowered his coffee. A chill moved through him, despite the warmth of the mug. Bear stood. The dog's ears pointed toward the front windows. Outside, somewhere beyond the garage, an engine was approaching. Jack closed the notebook. The sound grew louder. Gravel crackled beneath tires. Bear moved silently toward the bay door, every muscle alert. Jack stepped to the window. A faded blue pickup rolled into the lot and stopped near the entrance. For a moment, neither driver nor veteran moved. Then the door opened. An older rancher climbed out. Late 70s. Weathered face, cowboy hat. Slow movements that came from age rather than caution. Bear remained watchful but relaxed slightly. The man removed his hat. "You Roy's friend?" Jack nodded. "Used to be." The rancher stared at the building for a long moment. "Thought somebody might show up eventually." "You knew him?" The old man laughed softly. "Everybody around here knew Roy. Problem was, none of us knew the whole Roy." The words stayed with Jack. The rancher introduced himself as Dale Harper. He carried a cardboard box. Inside were photographs, thank you cards, a rusted coffee mug, small pieces of somebody's life. "I found these when I cleaned out my shed last month," Dale said. "Been meaning to bring them over." Jack invited him inside. The old man walked through the garage slowly, looking around the way people look around a church after a funeral, like they expected someone familiar to step out of another room. Then his eyes landed on the notebook beside Jack, specifically the name written across the page, Ethan Burke. Dale grew quiet. "You know him?" Jack asked. Dale nodded. "Never met him, but I know the story." Jack's chest tightened. Dale sat heavily on a stool near the workbench. For a few moments only the wind spoke. Then the old rancher pointed toward the notebook. "Roy came here one winter. Snowstorm. Roads nearly closed. Needed his truck repaired before morning. What for? Had to deliver something. Jack already knew the answer. Dale continued. Package, food, medicine. Couple $100 in cash. Jack looked down. Dale sighed. An older woman lived outside Cody, Ethan's mother. The garage suddenly felt colder. Roy talked about her? Not much. Roy didn't talk much about anything, but he told me one thing. Dale leaned forward. He said no mother should lose a son and then lose everything else too. Silence settled between them. Jack stared at the pages. The entries stretched back more than a decade. Month after month, winter after winter. Roy had never stopped. Not once. Not even when he was sick. Not even when his own money ran low. The realization landed harder than any memory. Because Jack remembered Ethan. He remembered writing the letter. Remembered standing beside the casualty officer. Remembered convincing himself the family would be taken care of. Then life happened. Years passed. Deployments, retirement, funerals, bills, survival. And somewhere during all of it, Ethan's mother had become another name buried beneath time. But not for Roy. Never for Roy. After Dale left, the clouds thickened over the mountains. A light snow began to fall. Jack spent the afternoon reading. Every few pages led back to Ethan. Roy had paid utility bills, delivered groceries, fixed a leaking roof, paid for a furnace repair, always anonymously, always quietly. As evening approached, Jack carried a chair outside the garage. Bear settled beside him. The snowflakes drifted lazily through the fading light. The mountains disappeared behind gray curtains. For a long time, neither moved. Jack watched the road. Bear watched the trees, the same way they had watched roads together for years. The same way soldiers watched roads in dangerous places. Eventually, darkness arrived. Jack remained seated. The notebook rested open on his lap. A single receipt fluttered in the wind. The final payment Roy had sent, just 6 months before his death. Jack stared at the date, then at the mountains, then at the empty road. His jaw tightened. A lifetime of memories pressed against him. The men who never came home. The names on memorial walls. The faces that still appeared in dreams beside him. Bear quietly shifted position and lay directly across the doorway of the garage. Like a sentry taking watch. Protecting the place. Protecting him. Jack reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck. The snow continued falling. Far away, through the darkness, a pair of headlights appeared. A pickup truck, moving slowly, much too slowly. The vehicle reached the edge of the property, then stopped. Its engine remained running, and someone inside was watching the garage. Jack didn't move, neither did Bear. Snow drifted quietly through the darkness, while the pickup sat at the edge of the property with its headlights cutting pale tunnels through the falling flakes. The old instincts returned immediately. Not panic, assessment, distance, cover, options. Jack had spent too many years reading dangerous situations to ignore what he was seeing. Most people pulled into a driveway. Most people knocked. Most people didn't sit in the dark studying a building. Bear rose slowly to his feet. A low rumble vibrated deep in his chest. Not a bark, a warning. The pickup remained motionless for another minute. Then the headlights turned. The truck rolled away and disappeared into the night. Jack watched until the taillights vanished. Only then did Bear relax. The snow continued falling. By morning, 6 fresh inches covered the valley. The garage looked like a photograph trapped inside a snow globe. Jack walked outside carrying a shovel. Bear bounded ahead, leaving tracks across the white ground. For a while, the simple work felt good. The cold air cleared his thoughts. The notebooks, Ethan, Roy, the mysterious visitor. Everything seemed slightly less heavy beneath the winter sky. Near noon, another truck appeared. The same faded blue pickup Jack had seen outside the diner. This time it pulled directly into the lot. Bear immediately moved between the vehicle and Jack. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-60s, broad shoulders, gray beard, weathered face. The same man who had been watching him in town. The stranger removed his gloves. Jack Mercer? Jack didn't answer immediately. The man noticed. A faint smile crossed his face. Army never leaves you, does it? Jack studied him carefully. The man wasn't armed, at least not visibly. His hands were open. His posture relaxed. But there was something measured about him, something deliberate. Who are you? Jack asked. Clint Voss. The name meant nothing. I'm Roy Callahan's cousin. Jack's expression didn't change. The man nodded toward the garage. Heard somebody finally showed up. Bear remained between them, watching, evaluating. Clint glanced down. Beautiful dog, Bear answered with silence. Clint smiled awkwardly. Not much for conversation, huh? No. Jack rested one hand on the shovel. What do you want? The question hung in the cold air. Clint shoved his hands into his coat pockets. Simple. I'd like to buy the property. Jack almost laughed. You drove all the way out here to buy a garage. Maybe. Why? Clint looked toward the mountains. Land's becoming valuable. Jack noticed the pause before the answer. A small pause, but enough. People often revealed more through hesitation than speech. How much? Clint asked. Not for sale. The answer came immediately. Too immediately. Jack knew it. Clint knew it too. The older man forced a smile. Think about it. I already did. Clint nodded slowly. For several seconds, neither spoke. The wind pushed snow across the lot. Finally, Clint stepped backward toward his truck. If you change your mind, I'll be around. Then he left. Jack watched the vehicle disappear down the road. Bear remained staring, long after it was gone. That evening, the temperature dropped sharply. The sky cleared. Stars appeared above the mountains. Jack spent several hours reading more of Roy's notebooks. The entries continued. Stories of people surviving because someone quietly stepped forward. Roy's entire life seemed built around helping others stand back up. Around midnight, Jack finally closed the notebook. Bear had been sleeping near the wood stove. Suddenly the dog stood. His ears snapped forward. Jack noticed it immediately. What is it? Bear walked toward the rear door. Slowly, carefully, not barking, listening. Jack set the notebook aside. Every muscle in Bear's body had changed. The dog moved like he had during police work, focused, alert. Something was wrong. Jack grabbed a flashlight. The two of them stepped outside. Moonlight reflected off fresh snow. The property looked untouched, silent, beautiful. Then Bear changed direction, toward the back side of the garage. Jack followed. The dog lowered his nose, sniffed several feet, stopped, sniffed again. Jack swept the flashlight across the snow. At first, he saw nothing. Then the beam settled on a set of tracks, fresh, boot prints, not his, not Clint's from earlier. These had been made recently, very recently. Someone had walked around the back of the building. Someone had spent time near the rear entrance. Jack crouched beside the tracks. The pattern immediately felt familiar. Not because he recognized the boot, because he recognized the behavior. The person hadn't approached the front. They'd circled the structure first, checked windows, checked doors, studied access points. Exactly the way someone would before attempting an entry. Bear growled softly. Jack followed the tracks farther. The footprints stopped near a side window. Someone had stood there, watching. Looking inside, realization settled heavily over him. The garage wasn't simply attracting visitors. Someone was searching for something, and whoever it was had no intention of introducing themselves. Bear suddenly turned toward the darkness beyond the tree line. His body stiffened. The dog stared into the forest. Jack followed his gaze. For a brief second, he thought he saw some movement between the pines, a shadow. Then nothing. Only darkness, only trees, only silence. But neither of them believed they were alone. Jack stood motionless for another few seconds, staring into the dark line of pines. Nothing, no footsteps, no flashlight, no sound except the wind moving through the branches. Bear continued watching. The dog trusted his nose more than his eyes, and right now, his nose was telling him something wasn't right. Let's go inside, Jack said quietly. Bear didn't move at first. Then, reluctantly, he followed. Jack locked the doors, checked the windows, checked them again. Old habits. The kind that never completely disappeared. Sleep came late. When it finally arrived, it wasn't peaceful. A distant popping sound drifted into his dream. Sharp, irregular. His sleeping mind turned it into rifle fire, dust, smoke, someone shouting for cover. Jack woke suddenly. His heart was already racing. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. The ceiling above him wasn't familiar. The room felt wrong. Then Bear barked. One sharp bark. Not fear, warning. Jack sat upright. The room smelled different. Not wood smoke, not coffee, something else. His boots hit the floor. Bear was already at the door. The dog barked again. Jack opened it. Cold air rushed inside, and with it came the smell. Smoke, real smoke, not memory, not a dream, smoke. Jack stepped outside. The mountains were black silhouettes beneath a sky full of stars. At first he saw nothing. Then a faint orange glow flickered behind a storage shed near the edge of the property. His stomach dropped. Bear, the German shepherd, was already running. Jack grabbed a flashlight and followed. The glow grew brighter. Flames danced through a pile of old lumber beside the shed. Not a wildfire, not yet, but it was spreading. The dry wood snapped and crackled. Sparks drifted into the night air. Jack immediately started moving. The nearest water tank sat beside the garage. He dragged a hose across the snow-covered ground. The cold burned his hands. Bear circled the fire, barking furiously. The dog wasn't panicking. He was tracking, looking, searching. As if he knew the fire wasn't the real problem. Water finally blasted through the hose. Steam exploded upward. Jack worked methodically. Years of training. Focus on the task. Control the situation. One step at a time. The flames began shrinking. Then Bear suddenly yelped. A terrible sound. Sharp, painful. Jack spun around. The dog stumbled backward from the edge of the burning debris. One front paw lifted off the ground. Another yelp. The sound hit Jack harder than the fire itself. Bear. He dropped the hose immediately. The remaining flames no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except the dog. Jack knelt beside him. Bear tried to stay standing. Tried to act as though everything was fine. But his leg trembled. The fur along his paw had been singed. The skin underneath looked red and angry. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. For years it had been just the two of them. The thought of losing Bear landed with a force he wasn't prepared for. The fire finally died behind them. Smoke drifted into the cold night. Jack barely noticed. He wrapped a blanket around Bear and carried him toward the truck. The old shepherd weighed nearly 80 pounds. Jack didn't care. Within minutes, they were driving down the mountain road. The nearest emergency veterinarian was 40 miles away. Snow whipped through the headlights. The steering wheel felt slippery in his hands. Beside him, Bear rested quietly beneath the blanket. Every few seconds, Jack glanced over, making sure he was still breathing normally, making sure he was okay. The clinic sat on the edge of Cody. Bright lights, empty parking lot. A tired veterinarian met them at the door. An hour later, Bear lay on a padded blanket while the doctor examined his paw. "The burn isn't severe," she said. Jack finally released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "He'll heal." The room became quiet. Then the veterinarian frowned slightly. "What is it?" Jack asked. She held up a small X-ray. A metallic object appeared near Bear's stomach. Tiny, unusual. Not something a dog would normally swallow. Jack stared at the image. "What is that?" The veterinarian adjusted her glasses. "I don't know." Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, Jack felt the story shift once again, because somehow before Bear had been injured, the dog had found something, and whatever it was had ended up inside him. Jack did not sleep in the clinic chair. He sat there all night with one hand resting lightly on Bear's shoulder, watching the slow rise and fall of the dog's ribs beneath a gray blanket. The veterinarian had said the burn would heal. She had said the metal object was small enough to pass safely. She had said there was no sign of internal damage. Jack heard all of it. He even nodded at the right times. but his eyes stayed on Bear. Every few minutes, the old shepherd opened his eyes, found Jack, and closed them again, as if checking roll call, as if making sure both of them were still present. Near dawn, the object passed. The veterinarian placed it in a small plastic cup and handed it to Jack with a confused look. It was a tiny brass tag, blackened by smoke, scratched nearly smooth, but one mark remained visible. A stamped number. Jack turned it over with his thumb. A key tag, not from a house, not from a vehicle, from a lockbox. Bear had found it near the fire. Maybe picked it up with his mouth before Jack even knew anything was wrong. Maybe tried to carry it to him. Jack looked at the sleeping dog. "You stubborn old fool," he whispered. Bear's tail moved once under the blanket. They returned to the garage that afternoon. Snow had melted around the burned lumber, leaving black streaks in the dirt. Jack moved slowly now, not because of age, because every inch mattered. He studied the fire site the way he once studied roads before a convoy moved through. Entry point, wind direction, fuel source, footprints, escape path. The fire had started behind the shed, but the burned pile had been moved there deliberately. Too neat, too convenient. Someone had wanted smoke, maybe panic, maybe distraction. Bear limped beside him, his front paw wrapped in a clean bandage. Jack kept trying to make him stay inside. Bear kept ignoring him. At the edge of the shed, the dog stopped. Nose down. He sniffed the dirt, then looked toward the garage. Jack followed him inside. Bear limped across the concrete floor, past the lift, past Roy's workbench, past the hidden wall compartment. Then he stopped near the center of the bay. The floor there looked ordinary, smooth concrete, oil stains, a crack running diagonally toward the drain. Bear lowered his nose to the crack and huffed once. Jack knelt. The brass tag felt warm in his palm. Number 17. He scanned the garage. There were labels everywhere. Drawers, tool bins, parts shelves. Roy had labeled everything. Jack stood and searched the pegboard. Nothing. The drawers, nothing. The old file cabinet, nothing. Then he noticed the hydraulic lift. A row of metal inspection plates ran along its base, each one stamped with a number. Jack crouched beside plate 17. It looked no different from the others, except the screws had been painted over more than once. He got a screwdriver. The first screw fought him. The second snapped loose with a sharp crack. Bear watched from a few feet away, ears forward. When the plate finally lifted, Jack aimed his flashlight down. There was a hollow beneath it, not large, but deep enough. Inside sat a steel box wrapped in oilcloth. Jack pulled it free. It was heavier than expected. He carried it to Roy's workbench. For a moment he only stared at it. Then he opened the lid. Inside were files, bank records, letters, photographs from Iraq, names, more names, and a sealed envelope addressed to him. Jack Mercer. Roy's handwriting. Jack did not open it yet. He went through the files first, slowly, carefully. The documents told a story too large for the notebooks alone. Roy had not just helped a few people from town. He had built a quiet network. Garage owners, retired mechanics, ranchers, widows, old soldiers, people spread across Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado. They repaired cars for veterans who couldn't pay, covered motel rooms when someone had nowhere safe to sleep, bought groceries, found jobs, paid electric bills before winter shut people down. No nonprofit name, no website, no sign on the wall, just phone numbers, handwritten records, cash deposits, small bank transfers, favors returned through other favors. Roy's garage had been the center of it, a dispatch point, a place where trouble came in through one door and help went out through another. Jack felt the room tilt beneath the weight of it. All those tools, all those records, all those empty coffee mugs. This had never been just a garage. It had been an outpost, a quiet LZ for people who had run out of safe places to land. Jack finally opened the envelope. The letter inside was short. Roy had never wasted words. "Jack, if Bear found this, then he's smarter than both of us. I hid it where nobody would look, unless they knew how to listen. This place helped more men than I ever could have helped alone. Some wore uniforms. Some didn't. Didn't matter. Lost is lost. If you're reading this, it means the garage is yours now. Don't let anyone turn it into gravel and paperwork. Keep the records safe. Keep the coffee on. And Jack, there's one more thing you need to know. The rest of the sentence ended there. No explanation. No second page. Jack turned the envelope over. Nothing. Bear suddenly lifted his head. A low growl rolled through him. Jack looked up. Outside the front window, a truck slowed on the road. Not stopping, just passing. Dark paint. Dented rear quarter panel. The same truck from town. The same truck from the night. Jack folded Roy's letter and placed it back in the box. The secret was bigger than he had imagined. And now he understood why someone wanted it buried again. The truck disappeared down the county road. Bear continued watching through the window long after it was gone. Jack closed the steel box and carried it into Roy's living quarters. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, he locked the door behind him. The mountains outside faded into darkness. Snowmelt dripped from the roof. The wood stove crackled softly. Bear settled near the bed, his bandaged paw stretched carefully in front of him. Jack returned to the letter. There had to be more. Roy never left things unfinished. Not Roy. Not a man who labeled every wrench and recorded every dollar he ever spent helping someone. Jack examined the envelope again. Nothing. Then he noticed a second fold hidden inside the paper itself. A narrow strip, almost invisible. He carefully opened it. Another page slid free. His pulse quickened. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jack, if you're reading this part, then you found the real box. That means somebody is probably sniffing around. They always do when land becomes valuable. Before you make any decisions, there's something you deserve to know. Something I should have told you years ago. Jack felt the room grow still. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. He kept reading. Fallujah. September 2004. The words hit him immediately. The memory returned before he reached the next sentence. Dust. Heat, a convoy trapped in a narrow street. Radio traffic breaking apart into shouting. Contact from two directions. Smoke. Confusion. Jack stopped breathing for a moment. He remembered not clearly. Not all of it. Just fragments. The way traumatic memories often survived. Roy's letter continued. You always said it was just another day. Just another mission. Maybe for you it was. For me it wasn't. Jack stared at the page, the memory sharpened, a Humvee disabled by gunfire. Roy trapped behind a concrete barrier, rounds striking walls nearby. Somebody yelling for everyone to fall back. Somebody shouting that Roy was gone. Jack remembered turning around. Against orders. Against common sense. He remembered running back. Not because he was brave. Because leaving someone behind had never been an option. The rest remained blurry. But Roy remembered. Every detail. You came back for me. Everyone else thought I was dead. You didn't. You dragged me out of there and carried me farther than I ever knew. The doctors told me later that another 5 minutes would have done it. You saved my life. Jack lowered the letter. The room blurred. Bear lifted his head, watching him carefully. The old shepherd slowly crossed the room and rested his muzzle against Jack's knee. Jack reached down automatically. His hand found the familiar fur, steady, grounding. Roy's words continued. I tried thanking you. You never wanted to hear it. You said we would have done the same for each other. Maybe that's true. But the thing is, Jack, you gave me years. Years I wasn't supposed to have. The garage, the people, every family, every veteran, every kid, every person whose name ended up in those notebooks. None of that happens if you leave me there. Jack sat completely still. The wood stove popped softly. A memory surfaced. Roy sitting beside him after deployment. Two exhausted soldiers drinking terrible coffee. Neither talking much. Neither knowing what came next. Jack had forgotten that conversation decades ago. Roy hadn't. So if you're wondering why the garage belongs to you, that's why. It was never payment. A life can't be paid back. It's simply where the story ends, or where it starts again. Keep the coffee on, Roy. Jack folded the letter slowly. His hands trembled, not from age, not from fear, from the weight of realizing that one forgotten decision had echoed across 20 years. All those people, all those lives, the entire network Roy built, the garage, the notebooks, the second chances. Every bit of it traced back to a single afternoon neither man had spoken about since. A sound outside interrupted his thoughts. Headlights swept briefly across the wall. Jack stood. Bear was already moving. They reached the window together. A vehicle sat near the road. Different this time. Not the blue pickup, a black SUV, 2 people inside, watching, then driving away. Jack's jaw tightened. The attention around the garage was growing, and if Roy was right, it had very little to do with the building itself. Bear gave a low growl. Jack looked at the steel box, at the records, at the notebooks, at Roy's letter. For the first time he understood what he had really inherited. Not property, not land, responsibility. And somewhere out there, someone else had finally realized it too. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. The snow retreated from the valleys first, then from the hillsides, then from the shadows beneath the pines. Weeks passed. The garage changed. Not all at once, a little at a time. A rancher brought over lumber to repair the shed damaged by the fire. A widow Roy had once helped arrived with a basket of homemade bread. A retired mechanic from Cody showed up, carrying a toolbox, and stayed 3 days. Nobody asked for payment. Nobody asked for recognition. They simply came, the way people come when they believe a place matters. Jack found himself keeping the coffee on every morning, just like Roy had written. At first it felt strange, then it became routine, then it became necessary. The old garage slowly filled with voices, stories, laughter, memories of a man who seemed larger with every passing week. Bear became part of it all. Children stopped by just to see him. Truckers scratched behind his ears. Veterans sat beside him while drinking coffee. The old shepherd accepted every bit of attention with quiet dignity. His burned paw healed slowly. A faint scar remained. Jack noticed it every day. The reminder of how close he had come to losing the one creature who never left. One afternoon, while sorting through Roy's records, Jack heard tires on gravel. He looked through the front window. A black SUV, the same one. Bear was already standing, the dog's ears angled forward. A low growl rolled through the room. The passenger door opened. A man in a suit stepped out. Behind him came Clint Voss. Jack wasn't surprised. Not anymore. The 3 men entered together. The garage became very quiet. Several locals who had been drinking coffee stopped talking. Everybody sensed trouble. The lawyer offered a practiced smile. "Mr. Mercer." Jack didn't return it. The man handed over a folder. Inside were legal documents, property evaluations, purchase offers, corporate paperwork. The lawyer explained everything carefully. A mining company wanted the land. The area contained valuable mineral deposits. The garage stood directly inside the proposed expansion zone. The offer was generous, far more money than Jack had ever seen. Clint watched him closely. Waiting, Jack closed the folder. "No," the lawyer blinked. "Perhaps you should think." "No." The second answer came even faster. Clint's expression hardened. "You don't understand what you're turning down." Jack looked around the garage, at the workbench, the notebooks, the coffee pot, the people sitting nearby. Then he looked back at Clint. "I understand exactly." The meeting ended badly. The lawyer left frustrated. Clint left angry. Neither bothered hiding it. Afterward, nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, one of the older ranchers laughed. The tension broke instantly. Coffee cups lifted. Conversations resumed. Life moved forward, but the trouble wasn't over. 3 nights later, Bear woke Jack just after midnight, not with barking, with urgency. The dog nudged him repeatedly until he opened his eyes. Immediately, Bear headed for the door. Jack followed. The night air felt unusually warm. Bear moved around the side of the garage. Fast, purposeful. Jack grabbed a flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, then landed on a figure crouched behind the building. someone was working near the electrical panel. The person froze. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the figure ran, disappearing toward the trees. Jack started after him, old instincts taking over, but age caught up quickly. After 50 yards, he stopped. The runner vanished into the darkness. Bear hadn't chased. Instead, the dog remained beside the electrical panel, growling, protecting something. Jack examined it. Several wires had been cut. More would have followed. A spark-blackened tool lay in the dirt. Whoever had come here wasn't stealing. They were sabotaging, trying to shut the place down, trying to make life difficult, trying to force him out. The next morning, the story spread through Alder Creek. By noon, people started arriving, not for coffee, for support. A retired electrician repaired the damaged wiring. A ranch owner donated security lights. Another veteran installed cameras. By evening, the garage looked stronger than before. Not weaker. Clint's mistake wasn't underestimating Jack. It was underestimating the people Roy had helped. A week later, the truth surfaced. One of the mining company's former employees came forward. Documents appeared. Emails, property maps, records showing Clint had been working behind the scenes for months. He wasn't protecting family interests. He wasn't honoring Roy. He had known exactly what the land was worth, and exactly how much profit waited if the garage disappeared. The community turned against him almost overnight. The mining company quietly withdrew. The lawyers vanished. The offers stopped. For the first time in months, peace returned. That evening, Jack sat outside beneath the fading light. Bear rested beside him. The old shepherd's scarred paw stretched comfortably across the gravel. Cars occasionally passed on the road. Several drivers waved. A few honked. One stopped long enough to drop off fresh coffee beans. Jack smiled. A real smile this time. The kind that reached his eyes. Bear suddenly lifted his head. Not because of danger. Because someone was arriving. An old veteran stepped out of a pickup truck carrying a folded photograph. He approached slowly. "Roy helped me once," he said. Jack nodded. "Come on in." The man looked toward the glowing windows, the coffee, the people inside, the light spilling into the evening. Then he smiled, and for the first time Jack realized something. Roy's garage had survived, not because of the building, not because of the land, because people refused to let the light go out. And maybe that's what this story was really about all along. Not the garage, not the money, not even the secrets hidden behind the walls, but the simple choice to leave a light on for someone else when the world gets dark. If this story meant something to you, I have a small favor to ask. Type a simple 1 in the comments if you believe kindness always comes back around, even years later. And if you've ever had a person or a dog who stayed by your side when everything else fell apart, type a 2. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to know which part of Jack and Bear's journey stayed with you the most. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more heartfelt stories waiting just ahead. Stories about loyalty, second chances, courage, and the extraordinary bonds that change ordinary lives. Until the next story, keep the light on.